Clara watched her family's theater crumble, drowning in debt, hunted by a corrupt councilman. A notorious mafia boss unexpectedly bought her entire world, forcing her into his dangerous mansion. When a deadly explosion erupted, he tore through the flames, saving her life, only to brutally claim her as his own. Now, trapped in his gilded cage, can she survive his dark obsession? The biting chill of an early autumn evening seeped through the cracks of the grand old facade of the velvet curtain, settling deep into Clara Rossi's bones. It was a cold that had nothing to do with a failing boiler, everything to do with a gnawing despair in her chest. She stood on the stage, the cavernous space swallowing her small figure, the only light spilling from a single dusty work lamp hung precariously above center stage. Dust motes, thick as snowflakes, danced in its anemic glow, a silent testament to the theater's slow, agonizing decay. Every breath Clara took seemed to pull the scent of old wood, stale velvet, and forgotten dreams deeper into her lungs, a heavy perfume of ghosts and what-ifs. Her fingers, calloused from countless hours mending costumes and wrestling with stubborn stage machinery, traced the rough texture of a peeling paint chip on a flat panel. This wasn't just a theater. It was the Rossi legacy, a vibrant, breathing entity woven into the very fabric of her family's existence. Her parents, gone too soon, had poured their hearts, souls, and every last penny into this place. Their laughter, their arguments, the fervent debates about lighting cues and character motivation, Clara could still hear them echoing in the silent wings, a poignant, almost unbearable symphony of memory. Now it was her burden, a glorious, crumbling weight on her shoulders. A tremor, not from cold but from exhaustion, ran through her. She was 27, but felt 1,000 years old. Her normally vibrant auburn hair, usually pulled back in a practical but elegant bun, had escaped its confines, straggling around a face etched with fatigue. Dark circles underscored eyes that had once sparkled with ambition, now dulled by endless nights of worry and endless days of futile effort. Her clothes, once functional, were now simply threadbare, smelling faintly of coffee dregs and theatrical dust. The faded denim of her jeans, the stretched-out knit of her sweater, each thread told a story of sacrifice. Clara moved, her steps echoing too loudly in the emptiness, towards the backstage office, a cramped, cluttered space that doubled as her makeshift home. Papers, bills, scripts, and budget spreadsheets lay strewn across her scarred wooden desk, each document a fresh stab of financial anxiety. The latest bank statement, stark and unforgiving, screamed its ominous message. Foreclosure was imminent. The words swam before her eyes, blurring into an accusatory haze. 2 weeks. If not, everything is lost. Lost, she whispered, the word tasting like ash. It wasn't just the physical building. It was her parents' memory, her own identity, the last tangible link to a world where hope had still thrived. She imagined the wrecking ball, a brutal metal fist, smashing through the proscenium arch, tearing down the velvet curtains that had witnessed a century of human drama. The thought made her stomach churn, a bitter acid rising in her throat. She slumped into her worn office chair, its springs groaning in protest, the scent of stale coffee clinging to the cracked faux leather. Outside, the Brooklyn night had fully descended, painted in shades of charcoal and neon. Through the grimy window, she could see the distant, glittering lights of the city's wealthier districts, a world away from her struggling corner. A world where money flowed like wine, where dreams were bought, not built with blood and sweat. A world where men like Councilman Sterling resided. Sterling. The name itself was a venomous whisper in her mind. His aggressive offers had started subtly, then escalated into thinly veiled threats. His vision for this block was a towering glass condominium, spitting distance from the historic district, and the velvet curtain was simply an inconvenient obstruction. His recent phone calls, smooth as polished granite, had contained insidious undertones. Such a shame, a young woman like you, struggling with so much, perhaps a change of scenery? Fresh start. He even hinted at minor city code violations that could make her life unbearable. Clara knew he had power. He had connections, money, and a reputation for getting what he wanted, by hook or by crook. She'd seen the way he smiled at public meetings, a politician's practiced charm that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He was a predator, sensing weakness, circling closer. And she, Clara Rossi, was the vulnerable prey. She pulled out her phone, its screen cracked from a previous fall, and stared at the contact list. Lawyers she couldn't afford. Friends equally strapped for cash. The theater community, blessed there. Hearts had offered moral support, but no miraculous financial intervention. She was truly alone. A tear, hot and defiant, tracked a path down her cheek, leaving a clean streak through the dust and fatigue. She was exhausted, drained to her very core, but still, a tiny spark of rebellion flickered. She wouldn't just lie down and die. Not yet. Not while the ghost of her parents cheered her on from the wings. The wind outside howled, rattling the ancient windows, a mournful dirge for a dying dream. It felt like the world was pressing in, suffocating her with its indifference and its ruthless demands. The weight of her parents' legacy, the crushing burden of debt, the predatory gaze of Councilman Sterling, it was all too much. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the image of her mother, vibrant and laughing on this very stage, or her father, passionately directing a scene, his voice booming with life. But even those cherished memories felt distant, fragile, threatened by the encroaching darkness. She was at the abyss, gazing into the void. Just as the last vestiges of hope threatened to extinguish completely, a distant rumble, low and powerful, vibrated through the floorboards. It grew louder, closer, a throbbing pulse that cut through the mournful silence of the theater. A sleek, almost impossibly long black car, darker than the night itself, slowed and then stopped directly in front of the velvet curtain. Its polished surface reflected the streetlights like a shard of obsidian. From its tinted windows, no face was visible, no intention clear. Only the ominous hum of its engine spoke, a silent, powerful pronouncement of arrival. Clara's breath hitched, a sudden, cold premonition tightening her chest. She didn't know it yet, but the darkness she had been fighting was about to take a far more tangible and infinitely more dangerous form. The dress rehearsal for Ghosts of Greenwood, a forgotten 19th century melodrama, was, in a word, disastrous. The stage lights, old and temperamental, flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that mocked the somber mood of the play. A young actress, bless her earnest heart, stumbled over her lines, her voice barely a whisper in the vast, cold auditorium. The flimsy cardboard tombstones, painted by Clara herself, wobbled precariously. Even the mournful strains of the cello music, played by a volunteer musician who was clearly past his prime, sounded more like a dying cat than a lament. Clara stood in the darkened aisle, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Every missed cue, every flubbed line, every creak of the aging stage was another nail in the velvet curtain's coffin. She could feel the despair radiating from her small cast and crew, mirroring her own. Again, she called out, her voice raspy, trying to inject a confidence she didn't feel. From Lady Eleanor's confession. More emotion, Amelia. Remember, your entire world is crumbling. The irony of her own words was a bitter taste on her tongue. Her own world was crumbling. Before Amelia could begin, a sharp cough echoed from the back of the auditorium. Clara whirled around, her heart jumping. A gaunt man in a too-tight suit, clutching a worn briefcase, stood awkwardly by the main entrance. Mr. Davies from the bank. Her stomach plummeted. This wasn't a good sign. He never came in person unless the news was dire. Ms. Rossi, Davies began, his voice dry and devoid of warmth. I regret to interrupt, but I have an urgent matter. He didn't meet her eyes, instead staring vaguely at the chipped cherub on the ceiling. You're a mortgage on this property. It's been acquired. Clara felt a sudden, dizzying lurch. Acquired? Her voice sounded thin, almost childlike. What do you mean, acquired? We submitted the application for the restructuring. We're still awaiting a response. Hope, however faint, had been a stubborn weed in her barren emotional landscape. Now it was being ruthlessly trampled. Davies wrung his hands. I'm afraid the bank saw a more immediate solution. A private party has purchased the outstanding debt. They now hold the full rights to the property. He gestured vaguely toward the street, where the sleek black limousine from the night before had just pulled up again, its engine now idling with a powerful, almost menacing purr. In fact, I believe they've arrived. A chilling silence descended upon the theater, far deeper than the previous mournful hush. Every head turned towards the heavy oak doors, which now swung open with an almost theatrical creak. The air suddenly felt thick, heavy with an unseen presence. Two hulking figures, clad in dark suits, entered first, their gazes sweeping the room with an unnerving efficiency. They were like silent, dangerous sentinels. Then a third man stepped through the doorway. Dante Volkov. He was taller than Clara had imagined, even from the distant glimpse she'd caught the previous night. His presence wasn't just physical. It was an almost palpable force, a weight that settled over the entire space. His suit, a dark charcoal, was impeccably tailored, clinging to broad shoulders and a lean, powerful frame. It looked expensive, impossibly so, a stark contrast to the faded opulence of the theater. His dark hair, meticulously styled, framed a face that was a study in controlled intensity, a strong jawline, a straight nose and eyes. His eyes were the color of glacial ice, piercing and unreadable, and they cut through the dimness of the theater directly to Clara. He didn't speak immediately. He merely walked, his steps measured and deliberate, down the main aisle. Each soft click of his polished leather shoes against the worn carpet seemed to resonate with an unnerving authority. A faint masculine scent, expensive and subtly dangerous, drifted towards her, sandalwood and something else, something sharp and clean like steel. Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her breath hitched. He radiated danger, an ancient primal power that made her instincts scream to flee. He stopped at the edge of the stage, looking up at her with those unsettling blue eyes. His gaze swept over the shabby set, the disheartened actors, the peeling paint. A faint, almost imperceptible curl of his lips suggested a flicker of disdain, or perhaps amusement. Clara felt a hot flush of indignation rise to her cheeks. How dare he judge her theater, her life's work, with such cold detachment? His bodyguard, a massive man with hands like cinder blocks, stepped forward and handed Dante a slim, leather-bound folder. Dante took it without breaking eye contact with Clara, then, with a casual flick of his wrist, opened it and presented it to her. The documents inside were formal, filled with legalese she barely comprehended, but the bold, black lettering of his name, Dante Volkov, at the top of every page was undeniable. He owned it. All of it. The velvet curtain. Her parents' legacy. Her life. Ms. Rossi, he finally spoke, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly smooth yet with an undercurrent of something hard, unyielding, like stone. It wasn't loud, but it filled the space, silencing every nervous whisper. My representative informs me you are struggling to maintain this establishment. He paused, his gaze dropping to her worn clothes, a subtle, humiliating assessment. As Mr. Davies has conveyed, I now hold the deed to this property. Effective immediately. Clara felt a cold wave wash over her, followed by a burning anger. You can't do this, she choked out, her voice trembling despite her efforts to keep it steady. This is a theater, a cultural landmark, not some investment property for you to tear down. A faint, humorless smile touched his lips, a fleeting shadow. Tear down? Perhaps. Perhaps not. His eyes, however, held no mirth. You have 1 week, Ms. Rossi, to vacate the premises. Collect your personal effects. Any remaining property will be cleared. 1 week. Clara stared at him, aghast. That's impossible. We have a show scheduled. This is my life. My parents built this. Dante tilted his head slightly, a predator observing its cornered prey. Or he continued, completely ignoring her outburst, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. You can show me something worth saving. Something that proves this derelict building and your quaint endeavors are not a waste of my considerable resources. His gaze lingered on her, heavy and invasive. Impress me, Ms. Rossi. Otherwise, the wrecking ball waits. He didn't wait for a response. With a curt nod to his bodyguards, he turned, his powerful form receding up the aisle. The heavy doors swung shut behind him, leaving only the lingering scent of his expensive cologne and the suffocating weight of his words. Clara stood frozen, the folder with the damning documents clutched in her trembling hands. Shock slowly gave way to a furious indignation, then to a cold, hard knot of hatred. This man, this dangerous, arrogant stranger, had just ripped away her last hope, her last tether to her past, and had done so with an almost casual ruthlessness. He had bought her entire world. And now she had a week to convince him it was worth more than the dirt it stood on. A week? Or everything she loved would vanish. Clara looked down at the contract, then at the empty stage, her heart a raw, bleeding wound. But deep within her, beneath the fear and despair, a tiny, defiant spark ignited. She would show him. She would show him exactly what the velvet curtain was worth. And she would fight him with every fiber of her being. But how? The question echoed hollowly in the vast, silent theater. She felt a profound sense of isolation, an almost physical ache of powerlessness. She was alone, pitted against a man who wielded power she couldn't even comprehend. And he had just given her an impossible task. A week? To save her soul, the week that followed Dante Volkov's chilling ultimatum was a blur of frantic, increasingly futile activity for Clara. She clung to a desperate hope, fueled by stubborn pride, and the sheer terror of losing everything. Her small office at the Velvet Curtain became a war room, littered with crumpled legal pads and half-empty coffee cups. She made calls, her voice hoarse, to every legal contact she knew, begging for a loophole, a delay, anything that could stop the inevitable. Each conversation ended with the same polite, regretful dismissal. Ms. Rossi, Mr. Volkov's acquisition is entirely legitimate. His legal team is formidable. There's no challenging this. The words, delivered with detached professionalism, felt like tiny, precise cuts. The phone felt impossibly heavy in her hand as she hung up, the click echoing the finality of each dead end. She even swallowed her pride and tried to rally public support, writing impassioned pleas to local newspapers, describing the Velvet Curtain as a vital cultural institution. The few replies she received were sympathetic but ultimately toothless, drowned out by the city's endless churn of news cycles. No one was coming to save her. No one could save her from a force as absolute as Dante Volkov. As if her internal battle wasn't enough, Councilman Sterling's insidious pressure ratcheted up. It started subtly, a series of accidents, designed to undermine her and expedite the theater's collapse. One morning, she arrived to find the main electrical panel tampered with, plunging the entire building into darkness. The repair cost devoured a chunk of what little emergency fund she had left. Another day, a critical shipment of custom-made costumes was mysteriously rerouted, delaying rehearsals and adding to her monumental stress. The faint, acrid smell of burnt wiring seemed to cling to the very air, a constant reminder of Sterling's predatory gaze. Then came the note, slipped under her office door, a crude, anonymous message scrawled on cheap paper. Quit now, before someone gets hurt. Accident happened. The words were blunt, unrefined, but the underlying threat was palpable, a cold, venomous whisper in the silence of the empty theater. Clara's hands trembled as she clutched the paper, her breath catching in her throat. He wasn't just targeting the building anymore. He was targeting her. The realization sent a shiver down her spine, raising goosebumps on her arms despite the muggy heat of the late afternoon. Her few remaining staff members, seeing her drawn face and the constant strain in her eyes, grew nervous, their glances furtive and worried. She saw the fear in their eyes and knew she couldn't risk them. Utterly defeated, her spirit bruised and battered, Clara knew she had only one option left: confront the devil himself. She found his address on the Volkov Enterprises website, a skyscraper of gleaming glass and steel in the heart of the financial district, a stark, almost obscene contrast to the crumbling grandeur of her theater. The journey felt like crossing into another dimension. The bustling, vibrant chaos of Brooklyn gave way to the hushed, almost sterile opulence of downtown. She stepped out of the old, rattling subway car and into a world of polished marble, hushed voices, and the faint, expensive scent of power. The lobby of the Volkov Tower was a minimalist masterpiece of dark stone and brushed chrome, guarded by men in suits even more imposing than Dante's bodyguards. A woman with an impassive face and eyes like chipped ice directed her to the 40th floor. The elevator ascended with dizzying speed, the silence inside broken only by the faint hum of machinery. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming sense of dread. She smoothed down her worn sweater, suddenly acutely aware of her shabby appearance amid such immaculate surroundings. Her palms were clammy, a knot of mingled fury and apprehension tightening in her stomach. When the doors parted, she was met by another austere hallway leading to a heavy, darkwood door. A discreet brass plaque read, D. Volkov. She knocked, her knuckles feeling impossibly small against the solid wood. Come in. The voice, deep and resonant, emanated from within, sending a fresh shiver down her spine. Clara pushed the door open, revealing an office that stretched across half the city's skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the metropolis, making her feel minuscule and insignificant. The room was vast, minimalist, yet permeated with an undeniable sense of luxurious power. A massive desk of dark, gleaming wood, sleek leather furniture, and not a single extraneous object. No dust motes dance here. Dante Volkov sat behind his desk, a dark, imposing figure framed against the city below. He didn't look up immediately, his gaze fixed on a tablet in his hands, his expression as unreadable as ever. The soft, ambient light from the city cast subtle shadows across his sharp features. The expensive scent she remembered, sandalwood and something metallic, filled the air, mingling with the crisp, almost clinical smell of the impeccably air-conditioned space. Finally, he looked up, his glacial blue eyes meeting hers. There was no surprise, no warmth, only a cold, assessing gaze that made her feel dissected under a microscope. Ms. Rossi, he said, his voice devoid of inflection. To what do I owe the unexpected visit? Clara straightened her shoulders, summoning a last vestige of defiance. You know perfectly well why I'm here, Mr. Volkov. Your acquisition is destroying my life, my theater, my family's legacy. Her voice, though trembling, held a surprising edge. I've tried everything. There's nothing I can do legally. So I'm here to appeal to you, to your humanity. The Velvet Curtain isn't just property. It's a place where dreams are made, where stories come alive. Dante leaned back in his plush leather chair, a subtle movement that somehow amplified his power. A faint, almost predatory smirk touched his lips. Humanity, he repeated, savoring the word as if it were an exotic, unfamiliar delicacy. You assume I possess such a weakness, Ms. Rossi. His eyes narrowed slightly. Dreams are for the naive. Stories. I deal in realities. Harsh, often brutal realities. Clara's jaw clenched. And what reality do you propose for me? For the people who cherish that theater. Dante's gaze was unsettlingly intense. My reality is one of pragmatism. I do not acquire assets to allow them to hemorrhage money. However, he paused, the silence stretching, pregnant with unspoken meaning. I did mention a performance, did I not? A demonstration of its worth. Clara's hope, thin as it was, flickered. Yes, and I will put on the best show this city has ever seen. Just give me time. Give me resources. Time is a luxury you no longer possess. Dante interrupted, his voice clipped and precise. And resources, those come at a cost. He steepled his fingers, his gaze unblinking. Here is my proposition, Ms. Rossi. You will move into my residence. Immediately. For the duration of this artistic endeavor, Clara stared at him, aghast. Move in? With you? Are you insane? Why would I possibly do that? Her indignation flared, overriding her fear for a moment. Protection, Dante stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Councilman Sterling is a persistent nuisance. You currently are an unprotected liability. And given my investment, I require my assets to remain intact. Furthermore, his eyes gleamed with something Clara couldn't quite decipher. I will require full access to your talents, to observe, to ensure my investment yields appropriate returns. Consider it a supervision. You will live under my roof. You will focus solely on this performance, and I will provide the means. Clara's mind reeled. Living with him, under his roof? The thought was utterly terrifying, suffocating. He wanted to trap her, to control her, to ensure she had no escape. It was a golden cage, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. Yet, as she looked into his cold, unyielding eyes, a horrifying realization dawned. She had no other choice. No money, no legal recourse, and a very real, very dangerous threat from Sterling. This was not a choice. It was an execution of her last possible option. It was a devil's bargain, and her soul, or at least her freedom, was the currency. I accept. She finally choked out, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Her voice was barely a whisper, thick with resentment and a horrifying acceptance of her fate. A faint, almost triumphant glint sparked in Dante's eyes. He rose from his desk, a towering figure that commanded the vast space. Excellent, he said, his voice flat but carrying an undeniable note of possessive satisfaction. My driver will pick you up at the Velvet Curtain this evening. Be ready. Clara felt a chill deeper than any autumn wind. She had walked into a trap, willingly, out of desperation. She had exchanged one form of bondage for another, far more insidious one. She was moving into the home of a dangerous man, a mafia boss, who now literally owned her future, and perhaps her very life. The unknown stretched before her, dark and terrifying. The black limousine was a silent, opulent beast, swallowing Clara and her battered duffel bag whole. The velvet seats, soft as a whisper against her skin, felt alien, suffocating. Her old duffel, holding the meager remnants of her life, looked absurdly out of place. She clutched the worn strap, her knuckles white. Each block they drove deeper into the city's exclusive uptown felt like another layer of her old life peeling away, leaving her exposed, vulnerable. The very air changed, growing cleaner, colder, smelling of money and manicured lawns. When the car finally purred to a stop, it was before wrought iron gates, impossibly tall, that swung open with a hushed, deferential groan. Beyond lay a driveway of pristine cobblestones leading to a mansion that looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Stone, dark and imposing, soared upwards, adorned with intricate carvings that hinted at old money, old power. Every window gleamed. Manicured hedges stood sentinel. The silence here was absolute, broken only by the crunch of their tires and the distant, almost imperceptible hum of the city. It was immaculate. It was intimidating. It was Dante Volkov's gilded cage. A house manager, impeccably dressed and radiating an aura of silent efficiency, met her at the massive oak doors. His name was Anton, and his polite practiced smile never quite reached his eyes. He led her through a foyer that could have swallowed the velvet curtained stage, past gleaming marble floors, soaring ceilings adorned with intricate frescoes, and furniture that looked more like museum pieces than everyday comforts. The air inside was cool, fresh, carrying the faint, expensive scent of polished wood and lilies. Clara felt a dizzying mix of awe and acute discomfort. This wasn't just luxury. It was a display of absolute, unassailable power. Every single detail screamed dominance. Anton led her to a wing she privately dubbed the guest prison. Her room was vast, easily 4 times the size of her entire apartment above the theater. A king-sized bed, draped in silk sheets, dominated the center, looking impossibly soft, impossibly inviting. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rich tapestries on the walls and a thick, plush carpet that swallowed her footsteps. A walk-in closet revealed a carefully curated selection of new clothes in her size, elegant, understated, and terrifyingly expensive. Mr. Volkov thought you might require some suitable attire, Anton explained, his voice smooth as silk. Clara felt a blush creep up her neck, a sudden, mortifying awareness of her own threadbare wardrobe. It was a calculated move, a subtle act of possession. He wasn't just offering comfort, he was erasing her old identity, dressing her in his world. Mr. Volkov also instructed that all your meals will be prepared by the household chef to your preference. Anton continued, gesturing to a discreet intercom. And any necessities you require, simply inform me. There will be security personnel on the grounds at all times for your protection. The word protection hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Clara knew it also meant surveillance. She was a prized possession, not a guest. She tried to assert herself. I'll need my own space to work. And access to a phone that isn't monitored. Anton's smile remained unwavering. Of course, Ms. Rossi. A private study has been prepared for you. And your personal devices are, naturally, your own to use. However, I must inform you that all outgoing calls and visitors will be vetted for security purposes. It is for your safety. His tone was polite, but his gaze was firm. There was no argument to be had. Clara felt a profound sense of exasperation, bordering on fury. She was a captive, albeit a pampered one. The first few days were a torment. The sheer silence of the mansion was deafening, a stark contrast to the lively, often chaotic energy of the theater. She felt like an exhibit in a museum, constantly observed by the unseen eyes of the security, attended by the silent, efficient staff. Food, rich and perfectly presented, arrived at precise intervals, often untouched. She missed the simple pleasure of making her own weak coffee, the comforting familiarity of her cramped office. Dante was a phantom in his own home. She rarely saw him, except for brief, unsettling encounters. He would appear in the grand dining room during dinner, silent and imposing, his presence filling the vast space. He never forced conversation, but his eyes would follow her every movement, dissecting her, analyzing her. One evening, she caught him watching her as she picked at a plate of seared scallops. His gaze was intense, almost predatory, but not unkind. It was the look of a connoisseur examining a rare, valuable object. Her stomach fluttered with a confusing mix of annoyance and a strange, unwelcome spark of awareness. One afternoon, seeking refuge from the oppressive quiet, Clara ventured into the private study Anton had mentioned. It was a beautiful room, lined with antique books, a grand piano in one corner, and a sprawling mahogany desk. On the desk, neatly laid out, were architectural blueprints to the velvet curtain, along with detailed financial reports she'd never had access to. Her theater, laid bare. He had everything. She felt a surge of indignation, but also a morbid curiosity. He wasn't just interested in owning it, he was studying it. As she pored over the documents, Dante appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was dressed in a dark, open-collared silk shirt, revealing the hard line of his throat and a hint of dark, sculpted chest. He looked less like a businessman and more like a dangerous, relaxed king in his domain. His presence instantly tightened the air, electrifying it. Finding anything illuminating, Ms. Rossi? His voice was a low rumble, making the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. Clara jumped, startled. She hadn't heard him approach. You had these, she asked, gesturing to. The blueprints, her voice sharper than she intended. All this time, you had this information? Due diligence, he replied, taking a slow sip of his drink. One does not acquire significant assets without understanding their full potential. Or liabilities. His eyes, glacial as ever, held hers. Your passion for that building is commendable. but impractical. Sentiment does not pay the bills. And what exactly do you value, Mr. Volkov? She retorted, defiance hardening her voice. Only money. Only power. He walked slowly into the room, stopping inches from the desk, his scent, that intoxicating mix of sandalwood and steel, enveloping her. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, the raw power humming beneath his expensive clothes. I value results, Ms. Rossi. Efficiency, loyalty, and a beauty, perhaps. His gaze flickered from the blueprints to her face, lingering on her lips. Clara felt an involuntary shiver. A strange heat bloomed in her stomach, a confusing, unwelcome sensation. It was a battle of wills, also something else, something primal and electric, sparking between them. He reached out, his long fingers brushing against a stray strand of her hair that had fallen across her cheek. The touch was fleeting, feather-light, yet it sent a jolt through her, making her heart pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her breath hitched. His eyes, now closer, held a depth she hadn't noticed before, a hint of something complex and dangerous. You are beautiful, Clara Rossi, he murmured, his voice softer, huskier. And you have a fire that even this broken theater cannot extinguish. Perhaps that is what I value most. Clara's mind reeled. Annoyance warred with a strange, undeniable attraction. She resented his control, his cold calculations, his dangerous world. Yet there was an unexpected intensity in his gaze, a hint of something beneath the impenetrable facade that both fascinated and terrified her. She was a pawn in his game, under his suffocating care, but he saw something in her, something he was drawn to. She didn't understand him. And that confusion, that maddening curiosity, was slowly but surely drawing her deeper into his orbit. She had thought she was just moving into his house, but she was slowly, inevitably, being drawn into his world. And she was beginning to realize, with a terrifying clarity, that escape might not be an option she desired for long. The velvet curtain, despite Dante's promise of eventual restoration, remained a monument to charming decay. Clara, despite her opulent new surroundings at the Volkov estate, spent every waking hour back in its dusty embrace, driven by an almost manic energy. She needed to prove its worth, not just to Dante, but to herself. The old stage, however, seemed to conspire against her. The temperamental lighting grid continued its erratic blinking, and strange, unsettling occurrences marred their progress. She tried to dismiss them as the theater's natural wear and tear. A cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach with each new accident. One blustery afternoon, they were rehearsing a particularly dramatic scene involving a rickety, oversized chandelier prop meant to descend slowly onto the stage. Clara, ever the pragmatist, insisted on checking the rigging herself. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and the nervous energy of her small cast. She stood beneath the prop, her neck craned upwards, directing the stagehand on the fly system. Slowly, Mark. Keep it steady. We don't want it to hit. Suddenly, a loud metallic snap echoed through the cavernous space, a sound like a bone breaking. Clara's eyes widened in horror. The thick rope, frayed beyond repair, whipped violently, showering dust and splinters. The massive chandelier, instead of its slow, controlled descent, plummeted downwards with terrifying speed, a heavy, glittering pendulum swinging straight for where Clara stood. Time seemed to warp. Her breath caught in her throat, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. Her muscles locked in shock. Her mind screamed danger, but her body was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer terror of the massive object hurtling towards her. She could feel the rush of air, hear the terrifying whistle of the heavy chains. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. This was Councilman Sterling. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, even as the chandelier bore down. Just as the gleaming crystal seemed destined to crush her, two dark blurs moved with lightning speed. Strong arms, like steel bands, wrapped around her, yanking her sideways with brutal force. She cried out as her head cracked against a wooden flat, a searing pain blooming instantly, but the impact of the chandelier hitting the stage was infinitely worse. The sound was deafening, a cataclysm of shattered glass, twisted metal, and splintered wood. The stage shook, and a cloud of dust and plaster exploded upwards, choking the air. Clara gasped, coughing, as her saviors released her. She stumbled back, disoriented, her head throbbing. Through the haze of dust, she saw two men in dark suits, Dante's men, Marcus, and another she recognized only as Leo, standing over her, their faces grim, their eyes scanning the ruined prop with cold intensity. Their presence, usually a source of annoyance, was now overwhelmingly, terrifyingly reassuring. They had been there. Always. A shiver, both of fear and profound relief, ran through her. How had they known? How had they been so fast? "Ms. Rossi, are you injured?" Marcus's voice was rough, devoid of his usual detached politeness. His gaze was sharp, dissecting her for wounds. Clara touched her temple, finding a rapidly swelling lump. "My head." "I'm fine," she managed, her voice shaky. But that wasn't an accident. Her eyes met Marcus's, and she saw the grim confirmation there. Later that evening, back in the gilded cage of Dante's mansion, Clara nursed a mug of herbal tea, her head throbbing despite Anton's insistent application of an ice pack. The house, usually a bastion of silence, felt heavy with unspoken tension. She saw the house manager and Dante's personal guards moving with a heightened sense of alertness, their usual quiet efficiency now laced with an almost predatory readiness. Dante found her in the main living room, sitting by a roaring fireplace she rarely used. He walked in, his presence immediately dominating the sprawling space. He was in a dark suit again, his expression as unreadable as ever, but there was a subtle, dangerous tightness around his mouth, a glint in his glacial eyes that spoke of barely contained fury. He wasn't pleased. He stopped directly in front of her, casting a long shadow over her, making her feel small and exposed. She instinctively flinched, remembering the plummeting chandelier, the brutal pull that had saved her. "The report indicates it was not an accident, Ms. Rossi," he said, his voice low, deceptively calm, yet resonating with an undercurrent of suppressed violence that made her stomach clench. "Frayed cables, intentionally weakened. A deliberate act of sabotage." Clara swallowed hard. "I told you. Councilman Sterling. He wants this theater gone. And now he wants me gone." Her voice trembled despite her best efforts to control it. The sheer brazenness of Sterling's attack, the cold, calculated intent to harm her, still shook her to her core. Dante's eyes narrowed, a cold fire burning within their depths. "He misunderstands his position. And yours." He reached out, his hand gently but firmly tilting her chin upwards, his thumb brushing over the bruised skin on her temple. The touch, though gentle, was possessive, almost territorial. Clara's breath caught. His scent, sandalwood and danger, filled her senses. "You are under my roof, Clara. Under my protection. This incident is an affront to me." Clara stared at him, whirlwind of conflicting emotions raging within her. Fear for her life, yes, but also a growing sense of security in his formidable presence. His world was dangerous, terrifying, but he was undeniably a shield. Yet it was a shield that came with an iron grip. What will you do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. A dark, humorless smile touched his lips. "Councilman Sterling has just committed a grave error. He has touched what belongs to me." His eyes, now colder than ever, promised retribution. "He will regret it. He will regret it profoundly." He dropped his hand, the brief touch leaving her skin tingling, confused. "But you," he continued, his voice hardening, "will remain here. You will not leave this house without my explicit permission or without one of my men by your side. Is that clear?" It wasn't a question. It was a command. A chilling declaration of ownership. Clara felt a flicker of rebellious anger, a desperate urge to resist, but was quickly overshadowed by the memory of the falling chandelier, the absolute terror. She was undeniably vulnerable. And He was undeniably powerful. She simply nodded, her throat tight. Good. Dante's gaze swept over her once more, a possessive scrutiny that left her feeling both exposed and strangely cherished. Now go rest. You are safe here, Clara. Sterling will not trouble you again. Not while you are mine. The word hung in the air, a silken chain wrapping around her, suffocating yet strangely comforting. She was his. A terrifying thought, yet after the day's events, it brought a perverse sense of relief. She was a valuable asset, a possession to be protected. The thought made her skin crawl, but her heart, still pounding from the near-death experience, also felt a strange, undeniable pulse of something else. Something akin to gratitude, or perhaps a forbidden thrill. She was a bird in a gilded cage, but outside, the wolves still roamed. And Dante Volkov, the most dangerous wolf of all, had just claimed her as his own. And for the first time, she wondered if she truly wanted to escape. The near catastrophe at the Velvet Curtain and Dante's chilling declaration of ownership had irrevocably altered the dynamic between Clara and the formidable Mafia Boss. She remained a captive, but one now fiercely protected. Her movements were restricted, always with a silent shadow of security, yet within the mansion's opulent walls, an unexpected intimacy began to bloom. Dante, after that incident, became less of a phantom and more of a constant, if unsettling, presence. He would often appear in the study while she worked, watching her pore over scripts and set designs, his gaze intense, yet now holding a flicker of something she hadn't seen before, curiosity. He asked questions, not about finances or contracts, but about the plays themselves. Why this particular tragedy, Clara? Or what emotion does that dialogue truly seek to evoke? His inquiries were sharp, intelligent, revealing a hidden depth she hadn't anticipated in a man who dealt in harsh realities. She, in turn, found herself explaining the nuances of character motivation, the power of a well-placed monologue, the magic of transforming a written word into a living, breathing emotion. She spoke of her parents' dreams, the countless nights they'd spent on that very stage, the belief that art could heal, could transcend. To her surprise, he listened, truly listened, his expression softening almost imperceptibly at times. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of rehearsals where Clara had pushed herself to the brink, she found herself in the mansion's sprawling library, seeking solace amidst the leather-bound volumes. The scent of old paper and polished wood was comforting balm. She was sketching a costume design when Dante entered, a rare sight in anything other than a suit, now dressed in a dark, open-collared shirt and tailored trousers, looking less like a Don and more like a dangerously attractive, very wealthy man. He carried 2 glasses and a bottle of aged scotch. He offered her a glass, his eyes observing her flushed cheeks and the smudges of charcoal on her fingers. You push yourself too hard, Clara. His voice was low, devoid of judgment, almost concerned. Clara took a tentative sip, the smoky warmth spreading through her chest. I have to. This show is everything. It's the last chance. She sighed, leaning back in the plush armchair, suddenly feeling the full weight of her exhaustion. And I don't want to disappoint you. Or my parents. Dante settled into the armchair opposite her, the firelight dancing in his glacial eyes, softening their edges. The air between them, usually charged with tension and unspoken power dynamics, now held a different kind of electricity, a quieter hum of shared space. My father, Dante began unexpectedly, his voice rougher, less controlled than usual, startling Clara. He rarely spoke of his family. He believed in power. Absolute. Unquestioning. His gaze drifted to the flickering flames, a shadow passing over his face. He saw emotions as weaknesses, a liability, especially love. For him, loyalty was bought, respect was earned through fear. Clara watched him, stunned by this rare glimpse into his inner world. This was a crack in the formidable empire he presented to the world. A raw, unexpected vulnerability. She saw the hint of a lonely boy beneath the hardened facade of the ruthless man. He never showed weakness, Dante continued, his voice barely a whisper, thick with an unspoken burden. Never allowed anyone to see beyond the mask. He prepared me for one thing, to inherit his empire, to rule through fear, to never, ever bend. He took a long swallow of his scotch, his jaw tightening. He died believing I would simply continue his legacy, unchanged. A darker version of himself. Clara's heart ached with a sudden, overwhelming wave of empathy. She understood the weight of legacy, the pressure to uphold a family name. But his had been a legacy of darkness, fear, and brutality. She saw the profound loneliness in his eyes, the deep-seated pain of a childhood devoid of genuine warmth or affection. He was a man built by a system he had both mastered and, she now suspected, deeply resented. "Is that what you are?" she asked softly, her voice gentle, devoid of accusation. "A darker version of your father." Dante's gaze returned to her, piercing. A flicker of surprise, perhaps even a hint of gratitude, crossed his face at her unexpected understanding. "Ah, I tried to be. For a long time." He paused, taking another slow sip. "But something always felt hollow, empty. Power without purpose is a cage, Clara. A gilded one, yes, but a cage nonetheless." Clara felt a profound connection in that moment, a bridge between their vastly different worlds. She understood cages. She had lived in one of her own making, of debt and responsibility. "My parents," she began, her voice thick with emotion, "they built this theater because they believed in something. They believed in the magic of stories, the connection between people. They didn't have much money, but they had passion and love for each other, for their art." A tear, unbidden, tracked a path down her cheek. "They taught me that true power isn't about fear or control. It's about inspiring, about creating something beautiful that brings people together." Dante watched her, his expression unreadable, yet his gaze lingered on her tear-streaked face with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. The air was charged, thick with unspoken emotions. He reached out, his long, warm fingers gently, almost hesitantly, wiping away her tear. The touch was exquisitely tender, a stark contrast to his usual forceful dominance. Clara's breath hitched, her body humming with a sudden, electric awareness. It wasn't just empathy anymore. It was something far deeper, far more dangerous. His eyes, usually so cold, held a raw, vulnerable hunger. "Perhaps," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. "They taught you well." "Perhaps. I was wrong about what truly holds power." His gaze dropped to her lips, and Clara felt an undeniable pull, a yearning she hadn't known she possessed. The world outside, the danger, the theater, even their vastly different lives, faded into insignificance. There was only him and her and the charged space between them. He leaned in, slowly, inexorably, his scent intoxicating. Clara's eyelids fluttered closed, a silent invitation, a surrender. When his lips finally met hers, it was tentative at first, a soft, exploring brush. Then, as she responded, a raw, desperate yearning ignited. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, consuming. It was rough, demanding, yet infused with an unexpected tenderness, a vulnerability that stole her breath. His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin, while the other tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, deeper into the embrace. In that moment, amidst the silence of the library, surrounded by the echoes of forgotten stories, Clara knew she was irrevocably lost. Lost in the dangerous depths of Dante Volkov, the Mafia boss who had shown her the first crack in his formidable armor. And for the first time, she wondered if being lost with him was exactly where she was meant to be. The connection was undeniable, a powerful, magnetic force that defied all reason and fear. It was a terrifying, exhilarating realization, a point of no return. The night of the showcase arrived, buzzing with an electric energy that Clara had not felt in the old theater for years. The velvet curtain, though still bearing the scars of age and previous neglect, gleamed under the newly installed, state-of-the-art lighting system Dante's people had quickly, and efficiently brought in. The seats, once sparsely filled, were now packed, a sea of expectant faces, a mix of curious patrons, skeptical critics, and a surprising number of Dante's impeccably dressed, watchful associates. Even Councilman Sterling, his face a mask of false cordiality, occupied a prime box seat, his eyes darting around with a calculating, almost predatory gleam that made Clara's stomach clench. Backstage, chaos reigned, but it was a joyous, exhilarating chaos. Actors paced nervously, technicians checked and rechecked their cues, and the air thrummed with anticipation. Clara, usually a whirlwind of anxious energy, felt a strange, serene calm settle over her. She had poured every ounce of her soul, every waking moment, every desperate hope into this performance. This wasn't just a show. It was a testament to her family's legacy, a defiant cry against the forces that sought to silence it. And for a fleeting, intoxicating moment, she allowed herself to believe she might actually succeed. Her heart, however, gave a nervous flutter when she saw Dante. He stood in the wings, a dark, imposing figure, his presence a stark contrast to the vibrant, colorful costumes and painted backdrops. He caught her eye across the flurry of activity, and for a split second his glacial gaze softened, a hint of something warm, possessive, passing between them. A silent acknowledgement. A promise. He was here. He was watching. He was protecting. Or so she believed. The first act was a triumph. The audience, initially skeptical, was quickly swept away by the raw emotion and inventive staging Clara had poured into her adaptation of the classic melodrama. Laughter rippled through the theater, followed by gasps and hushed whispers. Clara, peeking through a crack in the curtains, felt a surge of elation, a rare, intoxicating taste of vindication. She saw Dante in his private box, his face unreadable, but his posture relaxed, a subtle nod of approval in his eyes. During the intermission, the energy backstage was euphoric. Clara hugged her cast, tears blurring her vision. She had done it. She had breathed life back into the velvet curtain. As the audience shuffled back to their seats for the second act, Clara retreated to her small, newly tidy backstage office for a moment of quiet reflection and a check on a minor prop issue. She wanted everything to be perfect. The second act began, building to its dramatic crescendo. Clara could hear the swelling music, the impassioned dialogue, the rapt silence of the audience. The climax involved a grand, intricate set piece, a crumbling mausoleum revealing a ghostly apparition. It required meticulous timing and a perfectly calibrated stage mechanism. Clara was just about to head back to the wings to oversee the final cues when a sudden, jarring thump reverberated through the floorboards beneath her. It was subtle, almost imperceptible amidst the swelling music, but Clara, intimately familiar with every creak and groan of her theater, felt a jolt of unease. Then a flicker. Not the familiar, temperamental flicker of the old lights, but a sharp, unnatural flash from deep within the theater's ancient infrastructure, followed by a faint, acrid smell that quickly grew stronger, burning wires, dust, and something else, something chemical. Clara's blood ran cold. This wasn't a malfunction. This was fire. A deafening boom ripped through the theater, shaking the very foundations. The building shuddered violently. A primal scream tore from Clara's throat as the ceiling above her office groaned, plaster raining down in thick, choking clouds. The lights went out completely, plunging her into absolute, terrifying darkness. The triumphant swell of the orchestra died abruptly, replaced by a horrifying cacophony of screams, shouts, and the terrifying roar of spreading flames. Panic seized her. She fumbled desperately for the doorknob, but the explosion had jammed it. The wood splintered and warped. She kicked, pounded, screamed, but the roar of the fire and the terrified cries from the auditorium drowned her out. The air grew thick with smoke, stinging her eyes, filling her lungs with toxic fumes. The heat intensified rapidly, a scorching, living entity pressing in on her. Dante, she screamed, her voice hoarse, desperate. Where was he? He had promised to protect her. He had promised she was safe. Another Even larger explosion tore through the building, closer this time. The entire structure seemed to heave and groan like a dying beast. A section of the ceiling above her office collapsed with a sickening crash, raining down debris and splintered wood, barely missing her. She scrambled away, hitting her head against a sharp beam, a fresh wave of pain blossoming across her scalp. She felt blood trickling down her face, mingling with the soot and tears. The realization hit her with devastating force. This was Sterling's final, most brutal move. He wasn't just trying to sabotage the show. He was trying to burn the entire theater to the ground, with everyone in it. And she was trapped. Clara sank to her knees amidst the rubble, coughing uncontrollably, her body trembling. Uncontrollably. Despair, cold and absolute, wrapped its icy tendrils around her heart. The heat was becoming unbearable, the smoke suffocating. She could hear the frantic shouts of people outside, the distant wail of sirens, but they seemed impossibly far away, muffled by the roaring inferno. And Dante? Where was Dante? He had promised. His words echoed in her smoke-addled mind. You are safe here, Clara. Sterling will not trouble you again. Not while you are mine. Had he failed? Had his power, his empire, finally met its match? Or worse, a chilling thought, spawned by the terror and chaos, began to worm its way into her mind. Was this his doing? A final, brutal way to claim the property, clearing the board entirely, sacrificing her in the process? The thought was a dagger to her heart, a betrayal more painful than the physical wounds. The ceiling above her groaned ominously again, cracking, ready to give way completely. Flames licked at the doorway, turning the trapped air into a scorching inferno. She pressed herself against the remaining wall, her body shaking, every breath a searing agony. She was alone, abandoned, and the end was coming. The velvet curtain, her legacy, her life, was about to become her tomb. She closed her eyes, a silent sob racking her body, convinced that in her darkest hour, Dante Volkov had either failed her, or worse, sacrificed her. The crushing weight of perceived betrayal was almost as unbearable as the fear of being burned alive. The roar of the explosion ripped through the very fabric of the night, tearing through the symphony of Clara's triumph. In his private box, Dante Volkov, who had been watching Clara's performance with a rare, almost tender fascination, felt a primal jolt. His senses, honed by a lifetime of danger, registered the subtle differences. Not a gas main, not an electrical short. This was targeted. This was intentional. And the immediate suffocating scent of burning chemicals, sharper than any staged pyrotechnics, confirmed his chilling suspicion. Sterling. A heartbeat later, panic erupted. The elegant composure of the audience shattered into a maelstrom of screams, shouts, and frantic movements. Smoke billowed from backstage, thick and black, swiftly consuming the grand old theater. Dante's bodyguards, Marcus and Leo, were already moving, their faces grim, their hands instinctively going to concealed weapons. But Dante wasn't thinking of an orderly evacuation. He wasn't thinking of damage control. He was thinking of Clara. Her defiant eyes, her passionate spirit, the fragile vulnerability she'd shown him in the library. He had seen the way Sterling had watched her, the predatory gleam, and now that rat bastard had dared to touch what was his. A cold, ancient fury, deeper and more potent than anything he'd felt in years, ignited in his chest. It was the fury of a king whose prized possession had been desecrated, a lion whose mate was threatened. His carefully constructed mask of control shattered. This wasn't business. This was personal. This was war. Clara. The word was a guttural roar ripped from his throat, unlike anything his associates had ever heard from the stoic Don. He surged forward, a dark, unstoppable force, pushing past terrified patrons, ignoring the panicked cries of fire and evacuate. Marcus and Leo were a step behind, struggling to keep pace with their boss's unprecedented speed and single-minded focus. Don Volkov, the main exit is this way, Marcus shouted, grabbing his arm. Dante shook him off with a brutal force that left Marcus momentarily stunned. "She's backstage." His voice was laced with a raw, desperate edge. "Find her. Now." He didn't wait. He moved towards the backstage entrance, a maze of narrow corridors now choked with smoke and the debris of falling plaster. The heat intensified with every step, a searing inferno licking at the walls. He heard the terrified screams of stagehands, their faces blackened with soot, scrambling for safety. "Where is Clara Rossi?" Dante's voice, amplified by his sheer rage, cut through the pandemonium. He grabbed a fleeing stagehand by the collar, his eyes burning. "Her office." She was in her office. It's collapsing," the man choked out, pointing a trembling finger down a corridor now engulfed in flames. Dante didn't hesitate. He plunged into the inferno, ignoring the heat, ignoring the thick, choking smoke that clawed at his lungs. His tailored suit, usually a symbol of his power, was now a flimsy barrier against the raging fire. He moved with a speed and ferocity that shocked even himself, every instinct screaming "Find her." The corridor was a hellscape. Twisted metal, splintered wood, fallen lights. It was a death trap. But he saw it, through the smoke and flames, Sterling's goons. Two of them, crude, desperate, trying to ensure the theater was completely engulfed to finish the job. They wore cheap balaclavas, but Dante recognized the sloppy tactics, the scent of fear and desperation clinging to them. They saw him. Their eyes widened in a fleeting moment of terror before they realized who he was. They knew his reputation. They knew the price of crossing him. One of them raised a heavy wrench, clearly intending to swing. Dante didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need one. He moved with the brutal grace of a street fighter, years of suppressed violence finally unleashed. The first man barely had time to register the blur before Dante's fist connected with his jaw with a sickening crack. The man crumpled instantly, unconscious before he hit the ground, his head bouncing unnaturally. The second man, frozen for a second by the sheer, terrifying force of Dante's attack, turned to run. But Dante was already on him. He grabbed the man's shoulder, spinning him around, and delivered a knee to the gut that sent him gasping for air. Then, with a furious shove, he sent the man sprawling into a wall of roaring flames, a silent, merciless act of retribution. "Tell Sterling I'm coming," he snarled, his voice a low, murderous growl. He didn't care if the man survived. The message would be delivered. He continued deeper towards Clara's office. The heat was scorching, the air unbreathable. He could hear her. A faint, desperate cough, almost swallowed by the roaring fire. He pictured her trapped, vulnerable, and the image fueled his already incandescent rage. "Clara!" he roared, his voice raw, his lungs burning. He reached what remained of her office. The doorway was a twisted wreck of metal and wood, engulfed in flames. The ceiling had partially collapsed, burying the interior in rubble. He saw her, a small, trembling figure huddled against a crumbling wall, her face streaked with soot and blood, her eyes wide with terror. She was barely conscious, choked by smoke, her body shaking uncontrollably. "Clara!" he yelled again, fighting against a wave of suffocating smoke. He ignored the burning debris, the collapsing structure. He grabbed a heavy, splintered beam, his powerful muscles straining, and with a guttural roar, he wrenched it aside, creating a narrow opening. He plunged through, ignoring the searing heat, ignoring the sharp shards of wood and plaster that cut into him. He reached her, collapsing to his knees beside her, his large hands carefully, almost reverently, cupping her face. Her skin was hot, clammy, her eyes barely open. "Dante," she whispered, her voice a faint, desperate croak, laced with a terrifying hint of accusation and despair. You came." The implicit question in her voice, "Did you abandon me? Were you responsible?" was a fresh stab of pain in his chest, even amidst the raging inferno. "Always," he rasped, his own voice hoarse with smoke and emotion. "I will always come for you." He scooped her into his arms, her body surprisingly light, fragile. She coughed, weakly clinging to his expensive suit, smearing it with soot and blood. He felt a fierce, overwhelming surge of protectiveness, a desperate need to get her to safety. He turned, the weight of her in his arms strangely grounding, urging him forward. He had to get her out. He navigated the collapsing maze of the backstage, shielding her body with his own, enduring the falling debris, the searing heat. Marcus and Leo, having cleared a path of their own, met him near a partially clear emergency exit. They exchanged grim nods, their eyes filled with a mixture of relief and a profound understanding of their boss's unleashed fury. As he carried Clara out into the cool night air, leaving the roaring inferno behind, the sirens were deafening. Firefighters swarmed, paramedics rushed forward, but Dante ignored them all. He held Clara tighter, his gaze fixed on her soot-smudged face, his heart hammering against his ribs. She was barely conscious, murmuring incoherent words against his chest. He saw him. Councilman Sterling, standing across the street, his face pale and sickly in the flashing emergency lights, watching the destruction he had wrought, a look of desperate cunning in his eyes, feigning shock and concern. But when Sterling's gaze met Dante's, the politician's face drained of all color. He saw the raw, ancient fury, the absolute, unbridled rage in Dante's eyes. He saw a man who had crossed a line, touched something sacred, and now faced a reckoning far beyond any political maneuvering. Dante ignored the clamor of the emergency services. He ignored the questions, the flashing lights. He simply held Clara, her fragile body a stark contrast to his own imposing frame. He looked from her broken form to Sterling's terrified face, and then his voice a low, dangerous growl that cut through the cacophony of the disaster, echoed across the street, carrying a chilling, possessive vow that silenced even the sirens for a moment. "She is mine," he declared, his gaze burning into Sterling, his voice thick with unshakable resolve and deadly promise. Every eye turned to him, recognizing the raw, untamed power in his words. "And this theater is mine." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of absolute fact, a declaration of war. And Clara, nestled safely in his arms, felt a flicker of hope, a profound, overwhelming relief, and a terrifying, complete surrender to the man who had just risked everything to pull her from the jaws of death, claiming her as his own in the most devastatingly powerful way imaginable. The days that followed the inferno at the Velvet Curtain were a blur of pain, hazy dreams, and the omnipresent, comforting weight of Dante's presence. Clara woke in her lavish bed at the Volkov estate, the silk sheets feeling both alien and exquisitely soft against her bruised skin. Her head throbbed, a dull ache behind her eyes, and her lungs burned with every breath, remnants of the smoke she'd inhaled. But she was alive, and she was safe. Dante was a constant shadow. He rarely left her side, his imposing figure a quiet sentinel in the vast, sunlit room. He didn't hover, didn't smother, but his presence was a palpable force, a bedrock of unwavering protection. He would sit in a dark leather armchair, often reading, or simply watching her with those intense, glacial eyes that now seemed to hold a flicker of deep concern. His usual brusque commands to his staff softened when directed at her. Anton, the house manager, moved with an almost ethereal quietness, bringing Clara nourishing broths, soft teas, and precisely timed medications. She saw the tenderness in the way Dante's large, powerful hands carefully adjusted her pillow, the almost imperceptible frown of worry that creased his brow when she coughed, the quiet strength in his voice when he reassured her. "You are safe, Clara. Rest." It was a side of him she hadn't known existed, a fierce, raw gentleness hidden beneath layers of ruthless control. The contrast was startling, disorienting, and undeniably alluring. It sparked a profound sense of gratitude, so deep it felt like an ache in her soul. Her physical wounds healed slowly, but the mental scars ran deeper. The images of the collapsing theater, the screams, the smoke, the sheer terror of being trapped, they haunted her dreams. She would wake with a gasp, drenched in sweat, to find Dante already at her bedside, his hand gently stroking her hair, his presence a solid anchor in the storm of her nightmares. In those quiet, vulnerable moments, She found herself leaning into his strength, drawing comfort from his unwavering calm. He never asked her to recount the trauma, never pressed her, but simply was there, a silent, unyielding fortress against her fear. But even as she healed, the memory of Sterling's betrayal burned. The audacity of his attack, the cold, calculating intent to murder, filled her with a simmering anger she hadn't known she possessed. And Dante, as always, understood. The reckoning began almost immediately, a meticulously orchestrated symphony of destruction, carried out with Dante's signature blend of cold efficiency and brutal thoroughness. News reports, initially focused on the devastating fire at the Velvet Curtain, quickly pivoted. A relentless stream of damning evidence against Councilman Sterling began to surface. Anonymous leaks exposed his corrupt dealings, his shady real estate transactions, his blatant misuse of public funds. The city, once blinded by his charm, watched in shock as his empire crumbled. Dante never spoke of his methods, but Clara didn't need him to. She saw the headlines, heard the whispers. She knew his network, vast and shadowy, was at work. Business rivals, once too intimidated to speak, suddenly found their voices, backed by an unseen force. Investigative journalists, who had previously hit brick walls, now found crucial documents landing mysteriously on their desks. The fire, intended to silence Clara and demolish the theater, had instead become the catalyst for Sterling's spectacular downfall. He was stripped of his council seat, his assets frozen, his name dragged through the mud. The prestigious real estate projects he championed vanished into thin air. He faced multiple federal investigations, charges of arson, attempted murder, and a litany of financial crimes. The man who had sought to destroy her theater and her life was now utterly, irrevocably ruined. Clara watched it all unfold from the gilded cage of Dante's mansion, a chilling awe mixing with a profound, almost primal satisfaction. She should have been disturbed by the ruthlessness, the systematic dismantling of a man's life. And a part of her was. The old Clara, the idealist who believed in justice through legal channels, recoiled. But the new Clara, forged in fire and fear, the Clara who had faced death at Sterling's hand, felt a deep, fierce sense of vindication. One evening, as the news reported Sterling's official indictment, Dante stood by the large window in her room, his back to her, looking out at the glittering city lights. Clara, now strong enough to sit up, watched his rigid profile. "He's finished," she stated, her voice calm, devoid of triumph. Dante turned, his expression unreadable. He will spend the rest of his life paying for his transgressions, and regretting the day he touched what was not his. His gaze, steady and intense, met hers. "You did this," she said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. "He signed his own death warrant when he threatened you, Clara." Dante replied, his voice flat, emotionless. "You are under my protection. What is mine stays mine. No one touches my possessions, and no one harms them." The word possessions sent a jolt through her, a reminder of the inherent danger, the dark undercurrent of his world. She was his, bought and protected. But looking into his fierce, unyielding eyes, a different emotion swelled within her, a profound sense of security. He was dangerous, ruthless, and terrifyingly possessive. But he was also fiercely loyal. He had saved her. He had avenged her. He had given her back her life, and by extension, her parents' legacy. "Thank you," she whispered, the words choked with emotion, thick with a gratitude so immense it transcended fear. He walked over to her bed, sitting on the edge, his weight dipping the mattress. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. His eyes, usually so cold, now held a deep, burning intensity that promised absolute devotion and absolute ruthlessness to anyone who dared to threaten her again. "You are mine, Clara," he reiterated, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that vibrated through her. "And now you will always be safe." It was a declaration, a promise, and a claim. And in that moment, in the aftermath of terror and retribution, Clara realized, with a terrifying, exhilarating clarity, that she didn't just accept his claim. She desperately, unequivocally wanted it. She wanted him. The velvet curtain, phoenix-like, had risen from the ashes. 6 months after the devastating fire, the grand old theater unveiled its glorious reborn facade. Gone with appealing paint and the dust motes, in their place, gleaming brass fixtures caught the afternoon sun. Freshly painted murals celebrated Brooklyn's vibrant history, and the newly hung velvet curtains, a deep, rich crimson, shimmered with promise. The air, once thick with decay, now hummed with the scent of fresh wood, polished leather, and the sweet perfume of anticipation. Clara stood on the completely restored stage, the heavy, plush carpet feeling impossibly soft beneath her feet. The lights, state-of-the-art and brilliant, cast a warm, golden glow, making the space feel alive, electric. Her parents' dream, once teetering on the brink of oblivion, was not only saved but flourishing, a monument to defiance and unwavering passion. Dante had spared no expense, pouring limitless resources into its meticulous restoration. It was magnificent. It was perfect. It was all hers, under his implicit, unyielding protection. The grand reopening night was a triumph beyond her wildest dreams. The theater was packed, brimming with a joyous, excited crowd, a mix of old patrons, new faces, esteemed critics, and the omnipresent, watchful figures of Dante's world. Laughter and conversation mingled with the soft clink of champagne glasses. Councilman Sterling was a forgotten nightmare, his name a footnote in a distant, disgraced past. Clara, radiant in an elegant, deep green gown Dante had insisted upon, moved through the throng, accepting congratulations, her heart swelling with an emotion so profound it bordered on pain. She caught Dante's eye across the bustling foyer. He stood by the imposing main entrance, a dark, commanding figure in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, an almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips as he watched her. His gaze was possessive, absolute, but also undeniably proud. He had built this for her. He had rebuilt her world. Their life together in his sprawling mansion had settled into an unconventional yet deeply fulfilling rhythm. The gilded cage had imperceptibly transformed into a home. She still worked tirelessly at the theater, but now with a sense of boundless freedom, knowing her vision was supported, not merely tolerated. In Dante, he was still the Don, his world still one of power and strategic maneuvering, but the cracks in his empire had deepened, revealing the man beneath the mask. He would often find her in the library late at night, a glass of scotch in hand, listening as she recounted the day's triumphs and challenges. He'd offer sharp, insightful observations, his mind a labyrinth of strategies. They cooked together in his immense modern kitchen, his large, capable hands surprisingly adept at chopping vegetables, a domestic scene that felt utterly surreal yet profoundly real. Their shared meals were quiet, often punctuated by unspoken understandings, lingering glances that spoke volumes. The undeniable chemistry that had sparked in the study had ignited into a slow, consuming burn, a silent language of touch and desire. One crisp autumn evening, a few weeks after the reopening, they sat on the vast, private terrace overlooking the city, the lights twinkling below like fallen stars. Clara leaned into Dante's solid warmth, her head resting on his shoulder. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of distant wood smoke. "What do you want, Clara?" Dante murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear, his arm tightening around her. "Now that the theater is safe, now that Sterling is a distant memory, what is next for us?" Clara breathed deeply, inhaling his familiar, intoxicating scent. "I want this," she whispered, gesturing vaguely at the city lights at their shared peace. "And I want more. I want to build. Not just theaters, but a life. A family." The words, once distant dreams, now felt tangible, within reach. Dante's hand, large and reassuring, covered hers, his fingers intertwining with hers. "A family," he repeated, the words sounding foreign yet utterly right on his lips. His gaze, distant and intense, scanned the city below, but his focus was entirely on her. "My world is complicated, Clara. Dangerous. You know this." "I know," she replied, tilting her head to look into his eyes. But your world is also here, with me, and you are here, and you protect what is yours. Fiercely, she saw the hint of a smile, a rare, genuine curve of his lips. I choose this, Dante. I choose you. Every dark corner, every dangerous secret. Because with you I am safe. I am cherished. And I am finally home. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with an intensity that promised forever. Then that is what we will build. A life, a family. Here, together. He paused, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. There's something I want to do. A formal claim. Not just for the world, but for us. To solidify what is ours. A few weeks later, on a quiet, unusually warm winter afternoon, Clara found herself standing in Dante's private chapel within the estate, a small, exquisitely adorned room she'd never known existed. Only Anton and Marcus were present, silent witnesses. Dante, looking impossibly handsome and utterly formidable in a dark suit, waited at the altar. There was no grand ceremony, no fanfare. Just him and her and a priest who spoke in hushed, ancient tones. We placed the ring on her finger, a single, magnificent black diamond set in dark platinum. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a raw, overwhelming emotion. You are mine, Clara, he murmured, his voice thick with a vow that transcended any legal contract. My wife, my queen, my life, forever. Clara looked into his eyes, a profound sense of peace and belonging washing over her. He had saved her from ruin, avenged her, rebuilt her dreams, and claimed her heart. Their love was forged in fire and shadow, unconventional and fiercely possessive, yet undeniably powerful. It was a dark romance, uniquely theirs, a testament to two disparate worlds colliding and creating something irrevocably beautiful. And as the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Clara knew this was not an ending, but a new beginning. A beginning in a world where shadows danced, but where a mafia boss, her dark king, would forever stand as her unwavering protector, her sanctuary, her forever claim. Have you ever fought fiercely for a dream, only to feel your world collapsing around you? Clara Rossi's journey teaches us that even when the flames rage and betrayal cuts deep, your spirit's worth is unbreakable. She found love not in conventional comfort, but in the unwavering, formidable protection of a man whose dangerous world became her safest sanctuary. Dante showed us that true power lies in fiercely cherishing what's priceless, proving that love can heal the deepest wounds and redefine destiny. If this story touched your soul, reminding you that you deserve a love that fights for you, please like this video, subscribe, and join our community. Comment "My love is fierce" to tell us your story.